Hello and welcome to day 166 of 365 days towards racial change. My name is Tom Lyons-Nyback. We're talking and discussing racial issues, black issues in America, white power, economics, social standing status, social structures, um, all kinds of things. Here, two big thoughts emerge as I continue the project. First thought has two parts. First part is for the mind of Black Americans. Are Black Americans still living in a state of slavery mentally? Is that still an issue with them? Was slavery so powerful, long-lasting, ongoing that Black people are still uh, feeling vulnerable, still living out and participating in ways that whites have? They don't have to even have their hands on the mechanism anymore. Blacks just automatically live in a certain way, a certain manner. Conversely, the other side of that same coin, the mind of America, do white people uh, in general have a sense of entitlement, privilege in not just this nation, but of the world? And do they still just continue to naturally uh, live in a manner where they have just such a high expectation of, their privileged space in the world? Second thought has to do with financial literacy. Our literacy gives us access to move up higher, access to understand systems, to understand complexities and whatnot, and it helps us to maneuver. Much is the same thought for financial literacy. We see lately in the media commercials, entrepreneurship, things like that. Well, that's not by accident. You got to engage in some different levels of discipline to have some access um, to greater areas of wealth and all that. So some of the discussion, we're going to talk about some of this today in the civil rights movement, but with financial literacy elevation, it doesn't come by accident. Sure, there's pushback from institutions of whiteness and Europeans, colonialism, and things like that. But Black people have a responsibility as well to increase their vocabulary, their world, to have access um, to higher degrees of wealth. You know, otherwise we're just sitting there with unnamed resources. You know, we're carrying a pistol by the barrel instead of the handle, the butt. you know, that's the potential disastrous outcome of not having our financial literacy in order. And there are many others, political and social and things like that. Speaking of social literacy, I went through a period years ago, as I was reaching out for relationships and fumbling around, bumbling like a high school idiot. And one of my mentors at the time, you know, clued me in on some etiquette, some public etiquette, and how there needs to be some discretion and some things like that. These are ideas I didn't have the social literacy to understand that and receive that. I had the painful lessons first, the experiences, and then came the instruction to put me on the right track. Same for financial literacy. I'm inspired by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. I've read 3 of his works, watched a bunch of his videos. I like what he says, and just engaged in this project motivated because, you know, just in the previous example, I'm going through these experiences in life, yet I don't have the language, I don't have the understanding, I don't have the wisdom, anything. I'm totally at the mercy of the world. But now, I encounter this individual's language, his thought, his process, and it puts some substance to my experience, and now I can grow beyond it. Now that I can articulate it a little better, have some language, some words to put on it, it's very powerful. And um, the absence of a lot of these things in common society, you got to admit, a bunch of that is by design. You know, it's not taught in schools. Now, it's the biggest, it's the most important thing a person needs to know about their environment as far as how things work, naming things, categorizing, understanding etiquette and processes. Yet it's not taught in public schools. Some of that's by design. The major power structure doesn't want people knowing this stuff. They want to condition us for work and to be passive. You know, thank you, Dr. Anderson, for these works. So I'm going to show you what I've read, and we reference these books almost exclusively throughout the year. A Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. If you get one work, one text, please get that one because it'll give you good cross-section, good understanding of a lot of the issues we're talking about here. I'll tell you where you might be able to get some of these resources in a moment. Black Labor, White Wealth, Search for Power and Economic Justice, and Dr. Anderson's National Plan to Empower Black America, Powernomics. You can find Dr. Anderson at powernomics.com and the Heritage Institute in Washington, D.C. Behind me, you'll see a hashtag #US2 symbol. Very important is Black women conversing, supporting one another there. For kind of a Black Facebook experience, check out Blaggenuf, BLAGGENUF. And this is the World Wide Web. Therefore, you can find your voice, your flavor in there. There's billions of channels, YouTubes and Googles out there and stuff, Facebooks and whatnot. If you can't find what you're looking for, do what I did. Start your own voice and see where it goes. I got a very tight-knit group on my private email list. They don't even know each other from that list. That's how private it is, and I like it that way. And finally, Uncle Tom's Cabin. We take a fictional look at slave life in America, and because we can extract a lot of truths, find a lot of myths, start there back in slavery. Very important work. It kind of eases maybe a little bit of the tension from being so factual all the time. Although we use the text to, it's illustrating factual events and circumstances for slaves and the white owners, colonialism, European influence as well. Okay, today, I kind of free-formed it yesterday. Today, we're going to talk, kind of walk through Dr. Anderson's argument about the success or failure of the civil rights movement, social integration, and all that of the 60s. Very important time. I'm glad it happened. I'll talk a little bit at the conclusion at the end of this piece on some thoughts about good news about that. I will say overall, those events gave Black people plenty of symbols. It really put the fire out on overt racism. You can't publicly talk about black people, discriminate. You know, uh, if you're black and you don't get hired, they can't come out directly and tell you it's because you're black. They can make up other reasons. You can even feel that they're you've been discriminated against, but unless there's some explicit, specific, factual information, yeah, it's going to be a hard argument to sell, even if it's true. All right, so some things, the civil rights today we'll just talk about, kind of fleshing out the civil rights and social integration argument and dynamic. Um, the movement brought it brought attention to the plight of black Americans, especially in the Deep South. But remember, just racism is national. We associate it with the South, but Dr. Martin Luther King said when he went to Chicago and marched, he said the Southerners needed to come up north to learn how to hate. So, racism is national. It's a national issue. But, the videos and such from the 60s, um, as far as violating black people, mainly come from the South. Water cannons, beatings, imprisonments, German shepherds at little children, those things like that came. It was on the evening news consistently, and that's one thing that did help is the media. You know, the nation was, it wasn't some rumors or something maybe you read in the paper. The majority of the society had television sets, and they could see this on the evening news. It's the same way with social media today. Works in the same way. How Facebook and all these Googles and things like that. Everybody's got cameras on their phones now, so you ain't getting away with much in today's world. We can track you down. This Big Brother idea of 1984 is really coming to um, materialize in present day reality. Even this our our internet, our privacy is just out the window lately. I did some shopping at a store recently, and all of a sudden on my TV channel page, I get all these advertisements from what I just shopped for. So everything's networked and connected. Nobody's paying attention to all that, so I dare not do anything weird in front of my computer. Remember Snowden? People have their cameras and stuff blocked off now. I don't do much dirt, so I don't worry about it. So this terrorism, this violence against black folks was televised, made public, and all that. And it touched the sensibilities of white folks. Not all white folks are bent on seeing black people or any of people disadvantaged in America. I have a circle of white support and white friends around me who are giving me some financial education as well as great fellowship. You know, I can't picture these people having a prejudiced bone, but I can picture them, if they saw this violence and these violations against a specific American, they're going to be up in arms about it. That's one of the things that I think it helped the civil rights movement. The movement opened up, it kind of opened up a lot of doors. It allowed more acceptance of interracial marriage. It kind of put down the myth that whites are just naturally and overly superior to all other peoples on the planet. I won't go into a rant, but I see everybody engaging in the most ignorant and ludicrous behavior you can think of. Uh, Now, so that's some background with civil rights. We can go on and on, but the problem with the civil rights and social integration movement was that it gave us symbols. We got symbols, we got legislation, and all of that. Hell, I could write blank checks on that kind of stuff all day long, and the white-dominated government felt the same way. Eventually they got the idea with the help of Dr. King and other leaders when their language became all inclusive and they became more open that they said, let's write laws and stuff. We don't care about that. We're still not giving them economic power, economic access, um, uh, ease in the business arena, things like that. Those getting those tangible uh, assets and situations eluded black folks for, uh, for um, still elude black folks. So it's about the wealth gap and all that. You don't see whites getting down, putting skin in the game, and really making it happen for black folks. Not then, now, ever. But the wealth gap in America continues to grow. Black people are at the bottom of that chasm, the wealth gap chasm. Blacks also have less than 1% of the nation's wealth. And that's amazing when you see our sports people, all those millionaires in all the major sports, baseball, basketball, football, having all these millionaires doing all this stuff. you know, you got to realize that they're a minority of the minority. It's just not natural for black folks to move in economic success in America. Let's see. The So that's the attitude of white America there. This growing wealth gap and whatnot. And so, the big problem here is the lack of economic change for black folks. Black folks um, have settled for inclusion language, um, various kinds of legislations to prevent um, overt racisms and over ways to prevent black folks from participating in America. Uh, but we're still left with that economic disparity. We're like, it's like something I heard in the rooms of AA where people getting getting their alcohol issue under control. I've got the same issue. and how the literature says, putting the bottle down, the drink down is just the beginning. We really got to prepare to do some work because we're like the landowner that comes out of the storm shelter after a tornado. The house is flat, livestock is missing, and he says, "Boy, ain't it great that the wind stopped blowing," and ends all his efforts there. Well, there's a whole big mess to clean up. There are issues to address. We have to go launch into some massive action. Tony Robbins will tell us, once we get our head together, get our goals straight, we need some massive action, so we can glean some of this harvest that exists in the nation. I, I will say, again, there's a lot of white pushback to be dealt with, and we talk about that occasionally. But today, it's about getting blacks to understand and realize that we've not arrived. It's the victory is bittersweet because we're still left with extreme poverty, poor education, ignorance of how the system worked overall in general. Um, we were left with too many white alternatives for success. We didn't create our own, dynasties, empires, and such. There was still, all this was in the hands of white folks, and and we put our hat in our hands and still came to the white folks, after all this burnings, lynchings, rapes, slavery, beatings, dogs, imprisonment, incarceration. The storm kind of stopped blowing, the wind stopped blowing, and we didn't work in our own space. Uh, everything was, all the resources were trickling through white hands, white influence, and black folks were getting the leftovers at best. Uh, so today and tomorrow we want to look at, understand how black folks need to get better with um, understanding their place, their part. They need to get better with understanding that we've not come a great distance. We're fooled into thinking that we're really participating and experiencing the um, the American dream and whatnot. But when we just got so far to go, and now I'm going to end with this though. Some good news. The good news is that social integration and civil rights is no longer ahead of us. It's a experiment. It got us to the space. We can throw it off, so to speak, because of its failure, because uh, it did not loose us from the encumbrances of white society, of European colonialism. It didn't loose us from that. America is not the this melting pot where we are uh, being into this situation of equality and whatnot. They taught me that in school and stuff, but it's not my experience. It's not the those stigmas and stereotypes still exist in American society. We've not come any distance from um, living on a level playing field. You know, you would you would think, okay, maybe the problem is, the problem is economics, but there's also a color line in there. You know, it's economics and the color of my skin that makes me vulnerable, that puts me at a disadvantage compared to the other contemporary white folks uh, that I'm competing with in America. Um, so, so we know now that legislation, all that it was all symbolism. It was all lip service and all that. The politicians of the time and even today are like, yeah, let's keep talking about it, but we're still not giving black people reparations. We promised during all the many emancipations. Um, the Dred Scott decision, the black man has no rights that a white person should respect. That's never been overturned. We've tried to cover it over and legislate it, but we've not taken it out. Not like prohibition. They kept alcohol alive. All right, they did an alcohol experiment. They overturned prohibition. We're seeing the proliferation of marijuana now in the country. You don't see they didn't cover it up. They're overturning now. They're still working at the federal level to get it overturned. But the states are living quite fine in the loophole. Not so for black people. A black person that resists this. We'll talk about a little bit of the black overclass tomorrow. The black person having issues with this is, rejecting truth, rejecting what is apparent, right? We black folks are fools into thinking that because we move around the nation freely, um, uh, that if we participate, that we're participating, it looks like we're really participating equally, you know. It's why, but it's why I look around and, men uh, 20, 30 years my junior control me, white men, you know. Uh, I didn't have a mentor telling me not to go to high school, to get high and stuff like that, and screw around and all that. Um, uh, all these things go into the black response as far as what's real in America, what's happening, how's it working. These are these are the conversations that are important. And, we don't want to have civil rights in our pocket as some type of validation for how well we are living in America, because we're not. We got to take off these blinders. It's not until all black people are moving freely in America, gaining, getting drugs and dysfunction out of their neighborhoods. You don't see the white neighborhoods sharing any of that burden, uh, any of that dysfunction. Right? They're in safe, gated, quiet communities. You know, their law enforcement officers, uh, for the most part, you know, come out of these nice neighborhoods and come into depressed and challenged areas to do their work, right? So these are some of the things we need to understand about civil rights and social integration. about its success or failure. I agree with Dr. Anderson. It was a failure, but it was a necessary step. A child, as they begin to walk, they're going to fall down once in a while. Through slavery, hundreds of years of slavery, when we were finally kind of birthed into the nation, we fell down a lot. And social integration, that we fell down hard with civil rights. It left a scar, but we learned from that experience some very important things. Tomorrow I'll give you part two, some interesting points and bullet points we'll go through. But I want you to meditate, think on some of these issues we talked about, and read the brief notes especially. I'm Tomlin's Nyback. It's day 167 out of the way of 365 days towards racial change. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.